They called it Freeman's Folly, a warplane made of wood and glue when the world was building with aluminum and steel. The Air Ministry rejected it. Experts declared it obsolete before it ever flew. Even Winston Churchill questioned whether Britain was wasting precious resources on furniture that flies. But when this wooden wonder reached operational squadrons in 1942, it became the aircraft the Luftwaffe couldn't catch, couldn't shoot down, and couldn't stop. German fighter pilots reported enemy bombers streaking past at impossible speeds. Radar operators watched helplessly as wooden ghosts slipped through their detection nets. And Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, flew into a rage when he learned the truth. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. Built from plywood and balsa wood by furniture makers and piano manufacturers, powered by brilliance and desperation, it became one of the most versatile and feared aircraft of the Second World War. What happened when this unlikely warplane entered combat would humble the Reich and prove that sometimes the simplest solution is the deadliest. In October 1938, as Europe stood on the brink of war, aircraft designer Geoffrey de Havilland sat in his office at the de Havilland Aircraft Company in Hatfield, England, sketching an aircraft that defied every conventional wisdom of the era. The Royal Air Force was locked in a strategic debate that consumed military planners across Britain. How do you build a bomber that can survive enemy fighter defenses? The prevailing answer was armor, defensive guns, and self-sealing fuel tanks. Make the bomber a flying fortress, bristling with machine guns and protected by heavy armor plate. Except that it will be slow but compensate with defensive firepower. De Havilland looked at the problem from a completely different angle. What if, instead of trying to withstand enemy fighters, you simply outran them? His proposal was radical. A light bomber built almost entirely from wood, stripped of all defensive armament, relying purely on speed to survive. It would be fast enough that enemy fighters couldn't catch it and would fly high enough to avoid most anti-aircraft fire. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants that would make the Spitfire legendary, would push the wooden aircraft to speeds no bomber had ever achieved. The Air Ministry's response was swift and dismissive. In a letter dated October 1938, they rejected the proposal outright. Bombers needed defensive guns. Wood was obsolete. The concept was a fantasy. But de Havilland wouldn't let it die. He refined the design throughout 1939, even as war broke out. The concept evolved, not just a bomber, but a multi-role aircraft that could serve as a fighter, reconnaissance platform, and night fighter. One basic airframe adaptable to multiple missions, all made from wood. There was a hidden strategic brilliance in de Havilland's wooden construction. Britain was critically short of aluminum. Every pound was needed for Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Lancaster bombers. Steel was similarly scarce, but Britain had abundant timber and an entire industry of skilled woodworkers and furniture manufacturers whose factories were idle, their craftsmen unemployed as luxury goods production ceased. The Mosquito could be built using resources and labor pools that wouldn't compete with metal aircraft production. Piano makers, boat builders, furniture craftsmen, people whose skills were useless in building conventional aircraft, could build Mosquitoes. In December 1939, with Britain now fully at war and desperate for any advantage, the Air Ministry reluctantly authorized a single prototype. They expected it to fail. They expected to prove that wooden aircraft belonged in the previous war, not this one. On November 25, 1940, test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's son, climbed into the prototype Mosquito at Hatfield Airfield. As German bombers pounded London just 30 miles away, he pushed the throttles forward and lifted the wooden aircraft into a gray English sky. What happened in the next 40 minutes shocked everyone watching. The prototype Mosquito flew like nothing the test observers had ever seen. De Havilland Jr. pushed the aircraft through a series of maneuvers that would have been aggressive for a fighter, let alone a bomber. Tight turns, rapid climbs, high-speed dives. The wooden airframe held together flawlessly. Then came the speed trials. Flying at 22,000 feet, the Mosquito reached 392 miles per hour, faster than most fighters in service with any air force in the world. The Spitfire Mkii, Britain's frontline fighter, had a maximum speed of 370 mph. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E, Germany's standard fighter, could manage 354 mph. This bomber, this unarmed wooden bomber, was faster than the fighters that were supposed to shoot it down. Air Ministry officials who had dismissed the Mosquito as Freeman's Folly suddenly became very interested. Orders were placed for production aircraft, but Britain was fighting for its survival in 1941. Resources were stretched to breaking point. Building a new aircraft type meant diverting materials, labor, and factory space from proven designs. The Mosquito program moved forward, but slowly. Too slowly for some. The aircraft wouldn't reach operational squadrons until late 1941, and only in small numbers. Meanwhile, the air war was evolving in ways that made the Mosquito's capabilities increasingly relevant. RAF Bomber Command was suffering catastrophic losses on daylight raids over occupied Europe. German fighters and flak were slaughtering British bombers. By mid-1941, Bomber Command had abandoned daylight raids entirely, switching to night bombing, which was far less accurate but at least survivable. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, had refined its air defense network into a sophisticated killing machine. Radar stations tracked incoming British bombers from hundreds of miles away. Fighter controllers vectored night fighters, Bf-110s and Ju-88s equipped with radar, onto bomber streams. Searchlight batteries illuminated targets for flak guns. The night sky over Germany had become a vertical battlefield where British bombers died by the dozens. British bombers needed fighter escorts, but no British fighter had the range to accompany bombers deep into Germany. The RAF needed something that could operate alone, survive alone, and strike with precision. In September 1941, the first production Mosquitoes arrived at RAF Benson, assigned to No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit. These were reconnaissance variants, stripped of weapons and fitted with cameras. Their mission was to photograph German military installations, shipyards, and defensive positions, work that required flying deep into enemy territory in broad daylight. It was a suicide mission for conventional reconnaissance aircraft. The Germans had shot down dozens of British photo reconnaissance planes. Crews knew that flying these missions meant a strong likelihood of not coming back. The Mosquito crews approached their first missions with understandable trepidation. They would be flying unarmed over enemy territory, relying entirely on speed and altitude to survive. If German fighters caught them, they had no guns to fight back with, no armor to protect them. Their only defense was to run. On September 17, 1941, Flying Officer Alastair Taylor flew the Mosquito's first operational mission, a photographic reconnaissance of ports along the occupied French coast. German radar detected the high-flying aircraft. Bf-109 fighters scrambled to intercept. Taylor watched the German fighters climbing toward him through the clear morning sky. He pushed the throttles to maximum power and felt the Mosquito accelerate. The wooden aircraft climbed and accelerated simultaneously, something that should have been impossible for a twin-engine plane. The Bf-109s couldn't catch him. They got close enough for Taylor to see them clearly through his canopy, close enough that German pilots fired optimistic bursts from their cannons. But they couldn't close the final distance. The Mosquito pulled away, climbing higher and flying faster until the German fighters gave up and turned for home. Taylor completed his mission, photographed his targets, and returned to England without a scratch. His report was met with quiet astonishment. The wooden aircraft had actually worked. Over the following weeks, Mosquito reconnaissance aircraft flew dozens of missions over occupied Europe. German fighters tried desperately to intercept them. A few times they succeeded, when mosquitoes were caught at lower altitudes or when mechanical problems slowed them down. But the vast majority of missions ended the same way. Frustrated German pilots watching the wooden RAF plane disappear into the distance, untouchable. In Berlin, Luftwaffe intelligence officers compiled reports with growing alarm. A new British aircraft had appeared that their fighters couldn't catch. It operated with impunity over occupied territory. And most troubling, it appeared to be largely invisible to German radar. The wooden construction, it turned out, had an unintended benefit. The Mosquito's plywood airframe reflected far less radar energy than aluminum aircraft. German radar operators reported fleeting, ghostly contacts that appeared and disappeared, nothing like the solid returns from metal bombers. The Mosquito wasn't completely invisible to radar, but it was far harder to detect and track. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and second only to Hitler in Nazi hierarchy, refused to believe the reports. British aircraft outrunning German fighters? Impossible. His intelligence officers must be mistaken, or British pilots were exaggerating their performance. Then, on January 20, 1942, something happened that Göring couldn't dismiss. The Luftwaffe was holding a ceremonial parade in Berlin to celebrate the formation of a new fighter wing. Senior officers gathered in the capital, including Adolf Galland, Germany's youngest general and one of its most celebrated fighter aces. The weather was cold but clear, perfect for a parade. At 11:00 a.m., as speeches droned on and formations stood at attention, air raid sirens wailed across Berlin. Impossible. British bombers didn't operate in daylight and certainly not over Berlin in the middle of the day. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their guns, searching the sky for targets they couldn't see. 3 Mosquitoes from No. 105 Squadron, flying at 25,000 feet and over 300 miles per hour, screamed over central Berlin. They dropped their bombs on the parade grounds, barely missing the gathering of Luftwaffe officers, then banked away and raced for home at maximum speed. German fighters launched in pursuit. They never got close. By the time Bf-109s reached combat altitude, the Mosquitoes were already crossing back into friendly airspace, untouched. The propaganda impact was devastating. The Luftwaffe, celebrating its invincibility, had been humiliated over its own capital in broad daylight. Göring reportedly flew into an uncontrollable rage, screaming at his subordinates, demanding to know how wooden British aircraft could penetrate German airspace with impunity. General Galland later recalled, "Göring simply couldn't accept that the British had developed a bomber faster than our fighters. He blamed the pilots, the radar operators, the fighter controllers, everyone except himself. But the truth was undeniable. The Mosquito was making fools of us." By mid-1942, Mosquitoes were operating across multiple roles, and each variant brought new nightmares for German defenders. The bomber variant struck with precision in daylight raids that German defenses couldn't stop. Fighter bomber versions hunted German trains, ships, and vehicles. Night fighter Mosquitoes, fitted with radar, began stalking German bombers over England and occupied Europe. But it was the bomber variants that drove German commanders to distraction. RAF Bomber Command developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the Mosquito's unique capabilities. Fast, high-altitude raids in small numbers, sometimes just 2 or 3 aircraft, striking specific targets with devastating accuracy. Traditional area bombing by heavy bombers like the Lancaster was a blunt instrument. Hundreds of aircraft dropping thousands of tons of bombs on an entire city, hoping to hit important targets. It worked, but at catastrophic cost. Bomber Command was losing 5–10% of its aircraft on major raids. Mosquito raids were surgical strikes. A handful of aircraft attacking specific factories, railway junctions, or administrative buildings. Because they flew so fast and so high, losses were minimal. Because they could carry a reasonable bomb load, up to 4,000 pounds, they could still inflict serious damage. The Germans couldn't stop them through conventional means. Fighter interception rarely succeeded. Flak was ineffective against targets moving at 300+ mph at 25,000+ feet. Even when German fighters did intercept Mosquitoes, engaging them was nearly suicidal. The Mosquito fighter-bomber variants carried 4 20 cannons and 4.303 machine guns in the nose, a devastating forward-firing armament. German fighter pilots who attempted head-on attacks found themselves flying into a wall of cannon fire from an opponent faster and more maneuverable than any twin-engine aircraft had a right to be. Luftwaffe pilot Heinz Nock, who survived the war and wrote a detailed memoir, recorded his first encounter with a Mosquito in March 1943. "I dove on what I thought was an easy kill, a twin-engine bomber without defensive guns. I was closing rapidly when it suddenly accelerated and turned into me. Before I could react, I saw muzzle flashes from its nose. Cannon shells hit my Bf-109, destroying my radio and damaging my engine. I barely made it back to base. I had never felt so helpless." The psychological impact on German fighter pilots was significant. The Mosquito violated everything they understood about bomber aircraft. Bombers were supposed to be slow, heavy, and defensive. They were supposed to be targets. The Mosquito was none of those things. It was predatory. By 1943, the Mosquito was operating in variants that covered virtually every role except heavy strategic bombing. FOD, reconnaissance, light bombing, night fighting, fighter-bomber operations, maritime strike, pathfinder duties marking targets for heavy bombers, and even target towing for gunnery practice. Over 7,700 Mosquitoes would be built during the war, in 43 different variants. It became one of the most versatile aircraft in history, and every single one was made primarily from wood, birch plywood and balsa wood, held together with casein glue made from milk curds, shaped by craftsmen who had never built an aircraft before the war. The Germans tried Disper, to counter the Mosquito threat. They developed high-altitude fighter variants specifically designed to intercept wooden raiders. The Focke-Wulf FW-190D, Dora, and late-model Bf-109 GS received engine modifications to improve high-altitude performance. It helped marginally. German fighters occasionally caught Mosquitoes, especially when British crews made mistakes or suffered mechanical problems. But the loss rate for Mosquitoes remained remarkably low, less than 2% on most operations, compared to 5–10% losses for heavy bombers. One Mosquito operation above all others demonstrated the aircraft's unique capabilities and drove German defenses to the breaking point: Operation Jericho. On February 18, 1944, 19 Mosquitoes from Squadrons 487 New Zealand, 464 Australian, and 21 British took off from RAF Huntston on a mission that would become legendary. Their target, Amiens prison in occupied France, where over 700 French resistance fighters and political prisoners were held, many awaiting execution by the Gestapo. The mission profile was insane. Fly 200 miles across the English Channel and occupied France at treetop level to avoid radar detection. strike the prison walls with pinpoint precision, blasting holes for prisoners to escape through while avoiding the cell blocks where prisoners were held. Then fight through German defenses and escape back to England. It was the kind of mission that heavy bombers couldn't attempt. They lacked the precision and survivability. Conventional fighters couldn't do it. They didn't have the bomb load. Only the Mosquito combined speed, precision, bomb capacity, and defensive capability to make the mission possible. The Mosquitoes screamed across the French countryside at 50 feet, below German radar coverage, navigation conducted by dead reckoning and visual landmarks. German defenders had no warning. At 12:01 p.m., the wooden aircraft climbed to attack altitude and dove on Amiens prison. Group Captain Percy Pickard led the first wave, flying so low that his Mosquito's propellers nearly touched the prison walls. His bombs struck perfectly, blasting through the outer wall. The second wave, led by Wing Commander Ian Smith, demolished guard quarters and a section of the perimeter. The third wave stood by to strike again if needed, but held their bombs when they saw prisoners already streaming through the rubble. German fighters arrived minutes later. Focke-Wulf 190s from nearby airfields dove on the withdrawing Mosquitoes. A furious running battle developed across the French countryside. The Mosquitoes fought and ran, their superior speed allowing them to break contact. 2 Mosquitoes were shot down, including Group Captain Pickard's aircraft. He died in the crash, but the mission succeeded. Over 250 prisoners escaped, including key resistance leaders who would have been executed within days. The Amiens prison raid became an international sensation. It demonstrated that precision airstrikes could achieve objectives far beyond simple destruction. It showed that the Mosquito could conduct missions impossible for any other aircraft. For the Luftwaffe, Amiens was another humiliation. Wooden British aircraft had struck deep into occupied France, conducted a precision raid in broad daylight, and escaped despite fighter response. German defensive doctrine had no answer to this. As the war progressed into 1944 and 1945, the Mosquito evolved from an unlikely success story into an indispensable weapon. It became the aircraft of choice for missions requiring precision, speed, or subtlety. Mosquito pathfinders marked targets for heavy bomber streams, flying ahead of the main force and dropping target indicators on objectives with precision that radar-equipped bombers couldn't match. Night fighter Mosquitoes hunted German bombers, and later, V-1 flying bombs. Fighter bomber Mosquitoes attacked German shipping, railways, and vehicle columns with devastating effectiveness. The most powerful Mosquito variant, the BMK-16, could carry a single 4,000-pound cookie bomb, the same massive high-explosive bomb carried by Lancaster heavy bombers. A wooden aircraft built by furniture makers was delivering the same punch as 4-engine strategic bombers, flying faster and suffering far fewer losses. In the final months of the war, Mosquitoes conducted deep penetration raids into Germany that heavy bombers couldn't risk. They struck Gestapo headquarters buildings, SS facilities, and administrative centers with precision that minimized civilian casualties while maximizing military impact. One mission in particular showcased the Mosquito's evolution from rejected proposal to war-winning weapon. On March 21, 1945, Mosquitoes from No. 140 Wing struck Shell House in Copenhagen, Denmark, Gestapo headquarters for occupied Denmark. The building held not only Gestapo personnel, but also Danish resistance prisoners held in attics as human shields. The Mosquitoes attacked at rooftop level in waves, placing bombs with such precision that they demolished the first 3 floors, where the Gestapo worked, while leaving the top floors largely intact, allowing many prisoners to escape. It was a masterclass in precision bombing that only the Mosquito could have accomplished. German defenses, by this point, had largely given up trying to intercept Mosquitoes through conventional means. They had no aircraft that could reliably catch wooden raiders, and flak was ineffective against such fast-moving targets. The Mosquito operated with near impunity over Reich territory. The Germans did develop one aircraft specifically designed to counter the Mosquito, the Heinkel He-219, Uhu. Eagle Owl, a dedicated night fighter with performance that could match wooden raiders. It was an excellent aircraft, fast, heavily armed, and equipped with advanced radar. But only 268 He-219s were produced during the entire war, plagued by production problems and bureaucratic interference. Too little, too late. The Mosquito continued to dominate. By April 1945, as Nazi Germany collapsed, Mosquitoes were conducting missions that would have been unthinkable in 1940. They flew tactical reconnaissance over advancing Allied armies. They struck German headquarters and communications centers minutes before ground offensives began. They hunted the last remnants of the Luftwaffe on German airfields. The aircraft that experts had dismissed as obsolete before it flew had become irreplaceable. Final production numbers tell the story. Britain produced 7,781 Mosquitoes during the war. By comparison, Germany produced approximately 6,000 Bf-110s, the aircraft the Mosquito most directly competed against. But while the Bf-110 earned a reputation as vulnerable and outdated by 1942, the Mosquito remained state-of-the-art throughout the war and well into the post-war era. The loss rate statistics are even more telling. Heavy bombers like the Lancaster suffered overall losses of around 3.5% per mission, horrific casualties that meant the average bomber crew had only a 25% chance of surviving a full tour of 30 operations. Mosquito bomber squadrons suffered losses of less than 1% on average. Mosquito night fighter squadrons achieved kill ratios that dwarfed conventional fighters. In the defense of Britain against German bomber raids, Mosquito night fighters accounted for over 600 German aircraft destroyed, more than any other British night fighter type. The cost-benefit analysis was staggering. A Mosquito cost approximately £24,000 to build, about £1.2 million in 2024 terms. A Lancaster heavy bomber cost £58,000. The Mosquito required half the raw materials, one-third the man-hours, and no strategic metals. It flew faster, suffered far lower losses, and could perform roles the Lancaster never could. Geoffrey de Havilland's radical concept, rejected by experts, dismissed as impossible, built from wood by piano makers, had proven to be one of the most cost-effective weapons of the entire war. When the war ended in May 1945, the Mosquito had flown more operational missions than almost any other British aircraft type. It had operated in every theater of war: Europe, Mediterranean, Far East, and Burma. It had served with distinction in multiple air forces beyond the RAF, including the Royal Canadian Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force, and United States Army Air Forces. Over 39,000 operational sorties, more than 600 enemy aircraft destroyed by Mosquito night fighters, thousands of precision strikes on military targets, countless reconnaissance missions that shaped Allied strategy, and all with the lowest loss rate of any British multi-engine aircraft. The final accounting of Mosquito achievements fills entire volumes, but perhaps these statistics capture the essence. In 1944, during the height of Allied bombing operations, Mosquitoes dropped approximately 28,000 tons of bombs on German targets while losing only 108 aircraft. Lancaster bombers dropped 584,000 tons, but lost 3,345 aircraft. The Mosquito was achieving roughly 5% of the bomb tonnage, with less than 3% of the losses, a staggeringly efficient ratio. Post-war analysis by both British and German military historians consistently rated the Mosquito as one of the most successful aircraft designs of World War II. German generals, in interrogations after the war, frequently cited the Mosquito as one of the weapons they feared most and had no effective counter for. Hermann Göring himself, in one of his final interviews before his execution at Nuremberg, admitted, "The Mosquito was one of the outstanding aircraft of the war. I was green with envy. The British turning out something with such speed and versatility from wood, when we were using vast quantities of aluminum and steel. It was humiliating." The Mosquito continued in service long after the war ended. Some variants remained operational with various air forces until the late 1950s. The Israeli Air Force flew Mosquitoes in combat. During the 1956 Suez Crisis, more than a decade after the aircraft's supposed obsolescence. Today, fewer than 30 complete Mosquitoes survive worldwide. Wood deteriorates far faster than metal, and many Mosquitoes literally rotted away in the post-war years. The few surviving examples are treasured museum pieces, lovingly maintained by specialists who understand the unique challenges of preserving wooden aircraft. But the Mosquito's true legacy isn't in museums. It's in the fundamental lessons it taught about aircraft design and military innovation. The Mosquito proved that speed and versatility could be more valuable than defensive armament and armor. It demonstrated that unconventional materials and construction methods could produce world-class weapons when properly applied. It showed that small, agile organizations could out-innovate large bureaucracies. Most importantly, it vindicated the vision of Geoffrey de Havilland and the small team of designers, engineers, and craftsmen who refused to accept conventional wisdom. They looked at the same problem everyone else saw, how to build a bomber that could survive, and found a solution nobody else believed possible. Wing Commander Huey Idwell Edwards, an Australian pilot who earned the Victoria Cross flying early bombing missions and later commanded Mosquito squadrons, perhaps captured it best in his post-war memoirs. "We called her the Wooden Wonder, and wonder she was. Fast as a fighter, versatile as a Swiss Army knife, and tougher than she had any right to be. She saved my life more times than I can count, and she helped win the war. What more can you ask of an aircraft?" The de Havilland Mosquito flew its last RAF operational sortie in December 1955, 15 years after its first flight, in an era of jet aircraft and guided missiles. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how revolutionary the design truly was. The Wooden Wonder, Freeman's Folly, the aircraft the experts rejected, the Luftwaffe couldn't catch, and historians now recognize as one of the decisive weapons of World War II. Built from plywood and genius, powered by vision and desperation, the de Havilland Mosquito proved that sometimes the most unlikely solution becomes the most unstoppable weapon. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Frontlines as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.